They say lightning never strikes twice in the same place, but they never met the Harrington family. The night they threw me and my 6-month-old daughter into a thunderstorm wasn't the first time they'd tried to destroy me. It was just the first time I decided to become the storm instead. I stood on the covered porch of what used to be my childhood home in Millbrook, Connecticut, rain hammering the roof like divine judgment. In my arms, baby Sophie wailed, her tiny voice barely audible over the thunder. My fingers, white-knuckled and trembling, clutched the shredded remains of divorce papers that my husband had served me that morning, right before my parents changed the locks. The ink was running now, bleeding black rivers down my hands like a promise of what was to come. The front door cracked open, just wide enough for my sister Madison to lean out, her perfectly styled blonde hair untouched by the chaos around us. She wore that designer dress I'd bought her for her birthday last year, back when I still believed family meant something. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I'd spent my last savings on that dress, telling myself that maybe, just maybe, if I showed them enough love, they'd finally love me back. "Still here, Nadia?" Madison's laugh cut through the rain like broken glass. "Mom and Dad said you should get used to being abandoned. Oh, and that thing you're carrying, too." She gestured dismissively at Sophie, my beautiful daughter, as if she were nothing more than excess baggage. Before I could respond, Madison tossed an old suitcase onto the wet porch, its broken zipper spilling my few remaining possessions into puddles. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. Through the living room window, illuminated by the warm glow I'd once found so comforting, I saw them. My father, Richard Harrington, made a deliberate show of giving me a thumbs down, his face twisted with the kind of disgust usually reserved for something scraped off a shoe. My mother, Patricia, stood beside him, her lips curved in a smile that had haunted my childhood nightmares. They turned away in perfect synchronization, settling into their leather recliners to watch their evening programs. Every house we passed glowed with warmth, families visible through windows, living their normal lives, while we fought just to survive the night. The grocery store on Maple Street had closed hours ago, but its small awning offered minimal shelter. I pressed myself against the locked doors, trying to shield Sophie from the worst of the wind. That's when I saw them. Madison and her boyfriend, Trevor Montgomery, cruising slowly in his red Lamborghini. She had her phone out, recording us through the rain-streaked window. The car's speakers blared music as they passed, Madison's laughter cutting through even that. They made a U-turn, coming back for another pass, and this time, Madison rolled down her window just enough to shout, "Say hi to Instagram, drama queen!" The flash of her phone's camera left spots in my vision. A police cruiser appeared moments later, its lights cutting through the darkness. Hope flared in my chest as I waved frantically, Sophie's cries growing weaker. The officer slowed, and I saw recognition dawn on his face as Trevor's Lamborghini pulled alongside. Officer Davidson, who'd gone to high school with Madison, exchanged a few words with them through his window. Madison pointed at us and shook her head, mouthing something I couldn't hear. The officer nodded, gave them a wave, and drove on without even looking back at us. Sophie's body went rigid in my arms, then began to convulse. The tiny seizure lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Her breathing became shallow, rattled. In that moment, watching my baby suffer because of my family's cruelty, something inside me crystallized into diamond-hard resolve. The tears stopped. The shaking stopped. Even the cold seemed to retreat before the ice-cold fury that took its place. "I promise you, Sophie," I said, my voice carrying a weight that seemed to push back against the storm itself. "They will pay. Every single one of them will pay for this night." Dawn came like a reluctant witness, gray and hesitant. I was beyond exhausted, my body running on nothing but determination. I wondered if my photo had ever been there, before the Harringtons convinced me I wasn't worth documenting. "I've watched your family destroy you piece by piece for 20 years, Agnes said, setting a cup of tea in front of me. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "I kept records, you know. Every bruise you tried to hide in high school. Every time you came to school in clothes that didn't fit, because they gave everything new to Madison. Every scholarship they made you turn down so you wouldn't show up your sister." She pulled out a folder from a cabinet, thick with papers and photographs. "But this might interest you more." She spread out several documents, her finger tapping on one in particular. "Your father's real estate company, Harrington Holdings. I've been tracking his dealings for years. This transaction here, the Riverside Development Project. He bought public land designated for a community center, claimed it was for affordable housing, then flipped it to a casino developer for 10 times the price. The paperwork he filed with the city was fraudulent." I stared at the papers, my mind racing despite the exhaustion. "Why didn't you ever report it?" "With what proof that would stick? Your father owns half the city council." "But now," she looked at me meaningfully, "now you have a reason to dig deeper. And I have a feeling you're going to be very motivated." The next 18 months passed in a blur of calculated preparation. I found work at a diner called the Ironwood Grill, where the owner, Sam, didn't ask questions about my past and paid me under the table when I needed it. During the day, I served coffee and eggs to the very people who whispered about the Harrington family situation, without knowing I was listening to every word. At night, I cleaned offices in the Harrington Holdings building, using my maiden name on the application so no one would connect me to them. Madison had blocked me on all social media, but she hadn't thought to make her accounts private. Every boastful post about her shopping sprees, every photo of her new jewelry, every video of her mocking, pathetic people who, the rest went to her personal trainer, her plastic surgeon, her wine collection that cost more than most people's cars. Richard's boasting would be his downfall. Every Thursday, he held court at the Millbrook Country Club's bar, regaling his associates with stories of his business acumen. Hidden in my server's uniform with my hair tucked under a cap, I was invisible to him as I cleared nearby tables and recorded every word on my phone. His detailed explanation of how he'd manipulated city zoning laws, bribed inspectors, and destroyed 3 family farms to build a shopping complex that was never completed was particularly damning. He even laughed about how one farmer, Mr. Peterson, had broken down crying in his office, begging for more time to relocate his family. During this time, Agnes had introduced me to others the Harringtons had wronged. Maria Santos, whose family farm was seized through eminent domain fraud. Janet Williams, who'd worked as Patricia's personal assistant for 5 years without proper payment. Always promised that her ship would come in. David Chen, whose construction company went bankrupt after Richard refused to pay for completed work, then used his influence to ensure David couldn't sue. We formed an unlikely alliance, bound together by shared injustice and a hunger for retribution. Sophie grew stronger every day, her laugh becoming my anchor when the anger threatened to consume me. She took her first steps in Agnes's living room, spoke her first word in the break room at the diner. She didn't know that every milestone she reached was another piece of ammunition I gathered, proof of what my family had tried to destroy. Her first word wasn't mama or dada. It was light, pointing at the sun breaking through clouds. Even as a baby, she knew to look for brightness in the darkness. I studied at night after Sophie went to sleep. Legal texts from the library, online courses in accounting and financial fraud detection. Everything I could absorb about how to dismantle an empire built on lies. My notebooks filled with evidence, patterns, connections that would be undeniable when presented correctly. I learned about RICO statutes, embezzlement laws. Patricia had been organizing it for a decade, using it as her personal stage to demonstrate the Harrington family's supposed generosity. This year's theme was Building Tomorrow's Future, with proceeds supposedly going to establish a new youth center. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering Richard had destroyed the land meant for the previous youth center. I arrived with my coalition of the wronged. We didn't sneak in or force our way past security. I'd learned that Agnes's nephew worked for the audio-visual company handling the event. He'd ensured we had everything we needed already in place. The weeks of planning, the careful coordination, all led to this moment. The hall was resplendent, draped in gold and white, filled with Millbrook's elite in their finest attire. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and self-importance. The Harringtons held court at the head table. Richard in his custom tuxedo, Patricia dripping with diamonds that cost more than the youth center would ever see. Madison in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They were laughing at something, probably another cruel joke at someone else's expense. Richard took the stage for his keynote speech about family values and community responsibility. His voice boomed through the speakers. The Harrington family has always believed that our success comes with an obligation to lift others up. We don't just talk about family values, we live them every single day. That was my cue. I walked in through the main entrance, Sophie in my arms, wearing the same dress I'd been thrown out in, now cleaned and pressed. I didn't need to say anything. My presence alone was enough to create a ripple of whispers through the crowd. Sophie, as if understanding the moment, looked directly at Richard and said clearly, "Bad man." Richard's face went white, then red. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, fingers clutching the pearls that cost more than Sophie's medical bills. Madison actually tried to hide behind her date, but I didn't go to them. Instead, I walked calmly to the gift table where donations were being collected, and placed a thick manila envelope on top. Written on it, in bold black letters, "Your audience deserves to hear everything." Agnes's nephew activated the presentation system. The screens around the room, meant to showcase the Harrington family's charitable works, instead began displaying evidence. Bank statements, fraudulent contracts, the photos of Madison mocking homeless people on her social media, tagged at locations where she claimed to be volunteering. The audio played next, Richard's voice filling the room as he bragged about destroying the Chen family's business, laughing about how David Chen had begged him for payment. "That's taken out of context," Richard roared, but his voice was drowned out by the recording of him describing, in detail, how he'd bribed Commissioner Walsh to rezone the Riverside property. Patricia tried her usual tactic of fainting, but this time, no one rushed to help her. They were all transfixed by the screen now showing her emails to her accountant, discussing how to make personal purchases look like charitable donations for tax purposes. One email particularly stood out. Make sure the Cartier bracelet shows up as promotional materials for fundraising. No one ever checks. Madison made a run for the exit, but Maria Santos stood in her way. You posted a video of spitting on my daughter, Maria said quietly. Called her trash because her clothes came from Goodwill. That was the day after your father destroyed our farm. The room erupted, not in support of the Harringtons, but in outrage. Years of suspicions confirmed. Years of forced smiles while being condescended to. Years of watching them flaunt wealth while claiming poverty for tax breaks. I want to add something. David Chen stood up. Richard Harrington didn't just refuse to pay my company. He hired us specifically because he knew we were a small, immigrant-owned business that couldn't afford lawyers. He planned to destroy us from the beginning. Janet Williams stood next. Patricia Harrington owes me $73,000 in unpaid wages. I have every promise she made in writing, every excuse she gave for why she couldn't pay me while wearing jewelry worth more than my house. One by one, people stood. The Harringtons had hurt so many, assuming their wealth and influence would always protect. You've destroyed your family! No, I replied, holding Sophie closer. You destroyed our family the night you threw your granddaughter into a storm. I just returned the favor. Patricia's arrest followed shortly after. The charity fraud was extensive, going back years. Madison wasn't arrested, but within hours, her social media imploded. Every sponsor dropped her, every friend distanced themselves. She went from influencer to pariah in the span of a single night. Standing outside the church, watching the police cars pull away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. Agnes stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. What will you do now? She asked. I looked down at Sophie, who was playing with my necklace, oblivious to the chaos around her. Now? Now we build a real life. One where she never has to doubt her worth, never has to earn love that should be freely given. The next morning, the headlines screamed the story. Harrington Empire built on fraud. Charity Queen exposed as thief. Real estate mogul faces 20 years. But I didn't read them. Sophie and I were at the park feeding ducks, doing something gloriously, wonderfully normal. 6 months later, I received a letter from Madison. She was working at a grocery store in another state, living in a studio apartment, struggling to make ends meet. She wrote about understanding now what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be struggling while everyone around you seemed to thrive. She asked for forgiveness. I thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote back a single line. Forgiveness is earned, not requested. Start by becoming someone worthy of it. Richard and Patricia were both convicted. Richard got 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and bribery. Patricia got 8 years for charity fraud and tax evasion. Their assets were seized, with most going to pay back their victims. David Chen rebuilt his construction company. Maria Santos bought back her family farm at auction. Janet Williams opened her own business consulting firm with her settlement. As for she doesn't know that she saved me that night in the storm. That her tiny heartbeat against mine was the only thing that kept me from drowning in despair. Sometimes I drive past the old Harrington house. It was sold to pay legal fees, now home to a young family with children who play in the yard I was never allowed to enjoy. The mother waves when she sees me, not knowing who I am, and I wave back. It's better this way. People sometimes ask if I regret destroying my family. The question always surprises me. I didn't destroy anything. I simply revealed what was already broken, rotted from the inside by greed and cruelty. You can't destroy something that never truly existed. The family I thought I had was an illusion, and illusions always fade in the harsh light of truth. But here's what I learned, what I want Sophie to always remember. Your worth isn't determined by the family you're born into, but by the family you choose to create. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. And love, real love, doesn't throw you into storms. It shelters you from them. The storm that night didn't break me. It forged me into something stronger. Someone who could stand up not just for herself and her daughter, but for everyone else the Harringtons had crushed beneath their designer heels. It taught me that sometimes, the only way to stop being the victim is to become the storm yourself. And sometimes, becoming the storm is the only way to find the sunshine on the other side.